This video is going to show you how to set up the automatic thin client update. Normally, you would have the application server running on your server where your is COBOL, your application, and even maybe your data is installed. And your client would use is client to connect to the application server, who would then run your application. But if you update the version on your server, you want to automatically update your is client as well. You don't want to have to go and do each one of those by hand. So this is how the automatic thin client update works. You have the same setup with the application server, but you also have an HTTP server running, and I'm going to show you our HTTP server running on the default port of 10996. So in this case, the client is running an older version. It's going to connect to the application server, which will then notice that it's not the right version. So it's going to tell IS client that there is a mismatch. And the IS client is going to use SW Updater to connect to the HTTP server, which knows where to go to get the right files that it needs and push those up to the client. Then when it's done, it'll tell the client to go ahead and reconnect with the application server. And so let's take a look at how that's done. So I'm going to show you how the application would normally be set up, and then we will do our update. So in my case, I have a server that's a Windows 10 machine, and I have my application installed in See My App. It is the is application that you can find in our sample folder. And in this folder, I have a server.properties that shows the host name of my machine. I also have the installation of the current version, 2018 R1, that the client has, and the version I want to update to, which is 2018 R2. So we'll go to 2018 R1 and the bin and run the cob command. And I'll go to my app, and I'm going to run ISC server with that server properties that we just looked at. It's going to start on the default port, and I'll go back to my client side. Now on my client side, I have is COBOL installed, just the thin client piece. And you can see in my lib directory the date of my jars is 8/21, so it's 2018 R1. And I have an icon here that will start the application. So I'll double click on that. And it starts up the is application. You can see working just fine. Okay, so we're going to exit that. Let's go back to our server. I'm going to stop my server and exit the 2018 R1 cob command. I'm going to go back and go to my 2018 R2 and into the bin, and again my cob command so that my environment is set up pointing to 2018 R2. I'm going to go to where I want to start the application server, and we're going to look at the server.properties. And here is that commented line. When the client tries to start the application and the versions don't match, it's going to return a message saying that the client and server versions don't match. However, if you have this configuration variable set, then instead it will update. Now what I'm telling it here is to go to this site, this IP address and this port, to find the HTTP server and the settings for that server, which we're going to look at now. So I've uncommented this. We'll save it. And let's look at what the HTTP server will use. So when the HTTP server gets a request to update, it needs to know what version to update the client to and where to get the files it needs to update it. So let's find the version. If I run my ISC server -v command, it tells me that this is build number 950.6. So that's what I want to update my client to. And the HTTP server will automatically read a file that I have called swupdater.properties. Now I have these two lines. One is the version that we just looked at, 950.6, and the other one is the location of the files that need to be updated on the client side, which is the lib folder here. Now, I'm using a very simple example here, so I'm going from Windows 64-bit to Windows 64-bit. If you're updating a client that is a different flavor than your server, then you can specify the native folder to get the right version. So if, for instance, you have clients that are both 32-bit and 64-bit, you would use these two lines so that the HTTP server would know where to go to get the right libraries. But in my case, it's very simple, so I'm just going to have these two lines. And I'm going to start the server and pass it that server.properties with the new line in it. And I have to start both the application server and the HTTP server. So I'm going to specify the application server and the HTTP server like that, AS and HS. I'll press enter, and you can see that they are both listening on their respective ports, and I'm using the default port. So let's go to the client side. I'm going to double click on it. It's communicating with the application server, which says RON version. It communicates with the HTTP server, which says, okay, I'm going to update you. And then when it's done, it's going to go back to the application server and start the application. And the user will go about their business doing what they would normally do. Okay. So if I were to look at my lib directory on my client, you will see that the date of these files are now today's date. It's been updated. That's all there is to it.